Hi, welcome to a talk about, cultural venues and their future purposes, their future potentials, and maybe trappings. You might have noticed that music is back. And not only music, but also theater, performance, readings, poetry slams, and panel discussions as well. Thanks for coming to this one. And if you've been to some events recently, which I guess you all have, you might have noticed that it seems a little bit like some people are there more for the social experience than the cultural one. And I guess that goes to show that even though we have seen some very amazing digital formats pop up in the past, 1.5 years, that we still need spaces to gather in, to exchange and just to be with each other. And to have cultural experiences together, and which is why we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that because, while we can't be entirely sure that this will go on for so much longer in the short run, let's see, after September 26th, we might need to rethink the cultural institution, the cultural venue as such, in many different ways, or we may not, or we may even consider to find alternatives, which is why we have 3 guests on on this panel tonight with very different perspectives on the topic, very different experiences they're bringing to this panel discussion. And the first one is Andrea Götzke, who is a curator and cultural producer, who has been very active. She has co-founded the Music Pool Berlin. She co-ran the Torstraßen Festival for 10 years. And her recent projects include Picnic FM, an outside series during the pandemic, and for example, also collective practices at Akut macht neu. Then we have Ece Pasarbaşı, curator and founder of the Berlin Art Grant Clinic, who has since 2014 organized the Field Kitchen Academy in Brandenburg, a residency program essentially. And recently she has worked with Front Views for the sound art series Seedlings with Siblings. And then Matthias Mohr, whose guests we all are in some kind of way because he's running this place. He's a curator and dramaturg with a focus on contemporary dance, music, theater, and performance. And he has been the artistic director of Radialsystem, so this space, since 2018. And maybe we're going to start with you, Matthias. And I'd like to hear from you, how have the past 1.5 years been? Like, what did your job entail during this time, actually?
When the first lockdown started, of course, we also were like in a moment of shock in a certain way, but at the same time we very quickly thought, okay, how to keep the relationships up we have with the artists who work with us, because we are an institution which is totally based on working with the so-called freie Szene in Berlin, which is artists from the music field, from the dance field, from other disciplines also. And of course, those artists, they go for third-party funding. There's like several funding pots in Berlin, the Hauptstadtkulturfonds, Senatsförderung, whatever. And together we apply for money, and then when they get this money, they do the project in a place like the Radialsystem or in other places in Berlin. And if we would close our doors, then of course those artists wouldn't bring those projects to life. And at a certain time, it wasn't sure if they would even get some percentage of the money that was in this funding. So the whole situation for the artists we worked with was very much in jeopardy. Of course, there was then the 5,000 euros from the Senat, which was very helpful. but we try to keep, let's say, the machine, which is also questionable, but still the machine kind of running. So we invented also some online formats, of course, as many others, in order to to keep the artists working actually with us. And this was in the first 3 months, perhaps, and then with the first hygiene concepts, etc., we were able to go back to business and to really go on producing. And I would say we actually produced as much as outside of Corona, but without the public. We kept like production working here with the artists, and we mostly streamed. Then in the first 3 months, we were also kind of critical. Should we now stream and jump on this wagon, etc.? But let's say the question of keeping the artists working also brought us to a moment where we just kept on somehow.
Mm-hmm. And speaking more generally, what kind of social commitment or what kind of social responsibility does radialsystem have in your eyes? Well, beyond just sustaining the artists' working practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main question that also in the pre-talk we already raised this question, which is very interesting. I think what is considered social and what is considered cultural. I think it's on the one hand the boundary is very fluid, and on the other hand also it's two different things somehow. And I would say we look on a social impact from the cultural side, let's say. And there's other venues or other institutions who look from the social side more directly, perhaps. And but what is very important for us is questions like, let's say, how to bring people together in time and space. What you could call choreography, but what you could also call curation. Or and with this, especially in the time of Corona, the question of care. How do you care for the people you work with? How do you care for the relations you keep up, became much more important than before. And the question for us regarding to culture, and this is perhaps our main focus at the moment, is what is this term of culture that we spoke of also in a way that it is very relevant, and of course we all know it is very relevant, but then also the question, what do we refer to when we speak about culture? And mostly, I think, and this is the main problem and perhaps the main task, I think, for our time as a cultural institution, we refer to a very monocultural perspective on culture, which is mainly a white male, 400-year-old culture. We are just reproducing a lot with a lot of money also, with 80% of the cultural money that we have in Germany. And a venue like this, for me, has the task to have a much more egalitarian view on what culture is and how we can work on it together on a daily basis. And what is this we? Who is this? Who is invited? Who is also not invited because of marginalizations, etc. And how can we at least work to find a more egalitarian perspective on culture?
Mm-hmm. Which brings me to Asia a little bit, because you're running the Field Kitchen Academy, which also is kind of maybe something where it becomes a little bit indistinguishable. Is this social work or is this cultural work? Can you maybe explain the concept and also where you're doing this?
So, thank you. So the Field Kitchen Academy is a weird, unusual residency program. Let me put it that way, because it's kind of an amalgamation of different kinds of formats. So it's not a residency program. You go there and then just do your own work. So it is, yes, it's a residency program, but it also has an educational format, which I call it like your working sessions. And then there's also a period that you're invited to do nothing, like really nothing. The idea comes from actually basically coming together under one roof and meet with the people that are really prominent from the sound art scene or the music scene or the visual art scene, also sometimes from totally irrelevant seemingly irrelevant disciplines under one concept and then spend time together. It's, of course, it has parties at night, but apart from that, during the days, it's more like collaboration, creativity together, questioning, experimenting, failing, lots of failing, and then failing even more, but being just happy with it. And the idea came from just literally just trying to create new communities. And it's so great to see that even after the Field Kitchen Academy, the alumni is still meeting by themselves, producing projects as well.
Mm-hmm. And so you're also, well, we are now here in Berlin, pretty much at the center of the town, and you've also doing work in Berlin, you're also doing work in Istanbul. Can you maybe explain what the difference is between going into, well, kind of the countryside? Like, how does your work there differ from what you're doing in an urban environment?
Yeah, the Field Kitchen Academy is planned to be a mobile residency program, so it can take place anywhere. But now it has started, and it's kind of likes that location in Brandenburg. And the idea is, it started from this very basic idea. Let's say you're in a bus stop and waiting for the bus, and the bus doesn't show up. And then it doesn't show up again, and it's just like a long time you're waiting. And then this strange situation brings closeness between you and the other people at the bus stop. This was it. So I just ask people to come and then stay with us totally in the middle of nowhere in a strange situation. And then this creates like a bond between together. And of course we eat together. Food is very important for me. I always use the food. Also, it creates this bond together, but it also creates a bond with the vicinity of the people around the project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to Andrea, because you've been working with the project Collective Practices at Neu, which was a little bit more limited due to the pandemic. I think you're working with like very small communities, right? Can you maybe let us know what your experience with that particular project was?
Mm-hmm. So Collective Practices was an 8-month project that was planned to start in April 2020. So basically exactly when the pandemic started. This coincidence has brought up some kind of, I mean, I was sad that the pandemic started, but professionally it brought some like interesting learnings, I would say. Because, first of all, so what was Collective Practices about? It was a program that was meant to, where we wanted to practice like together, experience together in groups with artists and with like audiences, how we can get better at collectivity, and also to question how the cultural space and practices can facilitate experiences, collective experiences, so we can then take on in our life later on. And so we had planned like a lot of kind of in space embodied with movements and so on stuff, which then we had to rethink kind of entirely. And in a way, it gave us the immense opportunity to do kind of an open-ended program that could evolve. Like, okay, we said, okay, we want to do this now anyway. The term collective practice and in the pandemic was also suddenly much more urgent and relevant than it was before. And so we also launched an open call saying that, hey, if this resonates with you, just write to us and get in touch. And we kind of went on this journey together with the artists and participants and so on. And the program had the chance to also evolve over time in kind of unplanned ways. And I felt this was, this was actually a luxury in the end that we were able to do it that way. And what we did in the end was to look into small group formats, both online and also in space. Like in the summer, we tried to make use of the courtyard at Akut to do outside activities together, and this kind of small group work was something that also is one of the learnings which I took back, was super valuable. Of course, you reach less people in the end with it, so this is a downside. Like it's always those people that are most engaged maybe, or most interested, or also have the courage kind of to sign up for a small group thing. But in what happened in the groups was, I felt like so much more maybe that was happening when I was organizing a festival or so before.
Yeah, and so this was essentially still, even though you did it mostly or partially, or at least online, still very much organized around Akut macht neu. What I find very interesting about your work, though, is that you also very extensively used public space for your project. So Torstraßen Festival, obviously, and recently Picnic FM at Moabit. And what kind of advantages, because I'm interested also in speaking about possible alternatives to the traditional cultural venue, what kind of advantages do you see in working with public space?
What it can have serendipitous moments where you meet people that you would not have met otherwise, which does not happen all the time, but also happens, I would say. And you can reach, you may inspire someone who wouldn't have found you otherwise. I think this would be the greatest, or what I like most about public space.
Mm-hmm. And Matthias, how do you try to kind of facilitate that, just people stumbling into radialsystem that otherwise would maybe not go to a dance performance?
Yeah, it's a task, and I think that this brings us also to another topic in regards to let's say the institutions of the future, is also the architecture. Because the cultural institutions that we know, and I would say radialsystem still is kind of an open architecture, but at the same time also, to be honest, you have to know where to go to reach it. You know, you don't have to climb marble stairs, but it's still what it is. And I think if we want to think about how to change institutions, we also have to think about this, like the libraries, for example, they do this since 15 years already. Like there's this best practice library in Aarhus in Denmark, which is called Doc 1, which is like the new marketplace, let's say, for the society, with a lot of very interesting aspects. But we try to do it mostly through actually. Cross-curating, I would say, like really trying to combine things on a weekend that at the first sight don't have so much in common, but actually, of course, there is a let's say imminent connection, and people start to get curious and stumble into something that they perhaps wouldn't have. And we have the big luck that this whole architecture still provides the possibility to always like reinvent it and put something on the terrace, which we call the deck here, or in even every small room. And we more and more use the whole house as a dispositive for things that you explore more than you consume it. I think this is also something that gets more and more important for cultural institutions. I think that this, especially after Corona, I think it's very hard to get people back to a dark room and into a consuming situation of something. The people, and I think with the best reasons, they want to engage with others and engage with something and be part of it and not sit there and consume. And this is, I think, something we have to engage much more to make people part of it, not necessarily in a participatory way that was also a big buzzword for a long time, but let's say, in an autonomous way, that people can explore and make their own experiences and build relationships throughout a whole day with others who experience something at the same time.
And maybe this brings us to Ece, because I think you're also trying to involve the, in Brandenburg at the Field Kitchen Academy, you also try to involve the local community a little bit more, right? What is your approach there, or what are you trying to make happen there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the easiest thing because you're in a total new place in the middle of nowhere, and then you're trying to attract people for sound art and new music. Then also the Field Kitchen Academy is taking place in a private land. So also we are converting the private land into a public space, actually. And also because it's private land, I don't need to take permission from anywhere, and it's a huge area, and then we can just use wherever we want to use. And you know, one artist wants to use that corner of the land. We have like a man-made island, so we can go to the island and then use the island. Or now we have this 1,000 square meter space for storing the agricultural equipment. So we can also use there. So there is this kind of change. But also still I feel the task to make it attractive to the local communities. Then again, I just do the food. So what I do is, so every week we have a different working session leader. So last year it was Hans-Peter Kuhn, Christina Kubisch, and these really awesome people that we know from the artistry books. And then they lead a working session. And at the end of each week, we discuss which section of the working session was interesting, and then we design together with my chefs a conceptual dinner on that topic. And for the villages, they come and they can join us for free. So there's like food, there are drinks, and then of course it comes with a compromise that they feel like kind of obligated to stay for the performances. We try not to torture them, just kidding, but like it's kind of an exchange, and then whatever they say, like if they like it, that's great. If they don't like it, that's also great, because isn't that we go to many performances and then we just kind of try to state it in a more professional way, so it's totally fine. So that's one of the ways that there's all the events that are taking place in the weekends, they're like open to public, except the dinners. The dinners are paid, and it's not too much, but all the art events, they're just for free.
What was your experience so far, Andrea? Because I think one prejudice that people have about more like nomadic sort of events, or just events that are not necessarily fixed to a certain single space, is that it's really hard to build communities around these. What has your experience been with that?
Well, I think to build community takes time. So I think you can have a nomadic program, but it takes time to build community. Like it's something that you can't do just within one project, but it's something that requires like people coming back. I mean, I'm more from kind of a pop cultural background, and for me, community building has always been a kind of integral part of culture, because this is how I came to culture anyway, because I wanted to go to like hear music and there would be people that have the same aesthetics, and kind of the interest in the other people was kind of as important as the artist in a way, and this kind of co-creation of a space in a party or something like this. So I feel, but this then to actually like get to know people, and it takes time, I think. Yeah.
But and asking more generally, and all of you essentially, but we all agree that a cultural institution, whether it's nomadic or one single space, needs to kind of build communities, or at least like be in touch with the communities around it.
I think I think there are two ways. I also noticed, like after reading your questions, that there had two ways of understanding like social. One is community, and one is kind of addressing maybe structural like power imbalances in society or something, which I think is two different ways. Like there's one, the community, like the community of maybe people who are interested in what you're doing, and I think this is definitely a part of culture, and where also we can also in those different formats, like we're thinking small groups and all this, and I think there's so much to widen practices to also if we cannot have performance, big audience, like there are so many other ways to do it. And then there is the thing like, do we want to engage in kind of social work as a cultural institution? And in this, I would say, I would also think it from the cultural practice perspective, as I think you have also mentioned it a little bit, is like what is, I think it's also a bit maybe difficult to ask or to say, okay, if this is kind of high art and middle class people, it's art, and if it's like working class people, it's social in a way. Like, but what is the cultural perspective on working with people in your neighborhood, or what is the cultural or artistic interest in this?
I'm very much with you. I think that if we talk about social, perhaps more in German than in English even, it always has this aspect of aid somehow, or of there is already a power balance somehow implied with it. And I would also say, when what we do is of course question those power balances in as I said in the term culture we refer to, and especially, for example, what you said, the exchange of practices is something very beautiful, and I think this is something very simple to, on the one hand, enhance what we think culture could be, and on the other hand, also to build communities. For example, I think the pandemic also brought us back to those little groups, and I think community building is actually not about addressing a lot of people at the same time, but really to work with people on a steady basis, to have rituals also, to have dinners together, or things that are not just an idea, but building up over time, and building up trust, and building up relationships actually. Yeah.
I think you just mentioned a very powerful and important question at the very beginning, and you said like, how do you care about the other people? And that's how you build a community. That's that simple. And it's like a one person's, it's very psychological and individual thing too. Like people want to be heard, they want to be seen, and then they want to be, taken into consideration. Simple as that. And to do that, you don't need to do like shitty art projects, like, or so easy things, because you think that because they would understand this thing. No, I mean, with Juliana Hodkinson, when we had her at the very first year, and then when she was composing and her piece, and then this man from the village was doing his solo with the radio, and it was quite awesome, actually. It just, if you are open-hearted and if you just want to really do what you want to do, and you're open, and then you just do it not for the sake of doing something with the community, but you really want to do it, it's just there anyways. The sincerity just sorts it out.
Just one thought, like when we talk about community and the social aspect of cultural institutions, we often talk about outreach, and this is already the problem somehow, because outreach already says, okay, we are doing art, we are doing culture, this is what you can have, and now we address you, and you can eat it or not. And it's not about who is invited to build this culture. And it's a quite arrogant thing, actually, to think people who are not involved in culture should then consume it or be part of it. And we just have to put a lot of money in outreach, and then slowly they will. I think we have to go to a shift where this whole culture building starts with whom.
And also with the subcultures we create, like doing things for Turkish immigrants, doing things for, I don't know, younger female participants. That's also, I think, announcing the separation even more. All these fundings going for, I don't know, like decolonization topics or for culturally underprivileged communities. The more we announce it like that, I always believe, I think it still supports the separation, dividing the community even more. I'm always for, yes, of course we have to notice this and we have to still show that that was maybe not the best thing to do, but still, whenever we do projects or whatever, the festivals, I think it's quite important that we are really, I mean, if we are playing for a community that is going to be equal someday, why don't we just start doing it right now instead of just dividing people?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm emphasizing the social responsibility of cultural institutions a little bit, because I'm also thinking in financial terms, because obviously a lot of cultural institutions get funded by the state, so there's an at least implicit incentive to do some social or even political work. So I'm interested in alternative models, and I was curious whether or not you have been thinking about that, whether you see certain models that are already perhaps even at play, where people are kind of trying to get around maybe like the funding problem, because obviously looking into the future as we're doing it now, there is a possibility that in the future there will be less funding thanks to the pandemic and the recession that came with it, or was amplified by it. So has any of you any examples of alternative models when it comes to that?
I think only on smaller scales. I mean, not personally. Most of the projects that I've been doing were at least co-funded and then plus tickets. And I've also been, like in kind of music scene, also done things just based on ticket sales and so on, which is always mostly at the end not enough. And I mean, I know there are some ways, like some who experiment with kind of membership fees or something. But I think if we are thinking about larger budgets, it's mostly funding that I know of, actually.
Yeah, we also have some participation fee from the residents that we're having, and then we also have funding. But then I was thinking, what about the funding organizations? I mean, what if for example, German bureaucracy was more simpler, and then the people working in these fundings were spending less time trying to fit every project into a slot that they have just decided. And all these bureaucracy, all these paper, all this time, also from us, it could have been less, and then people can, simplify their work. They work less hours, and then there's even more money, and life is more easier too.
Yeah, I'm still not so okay with the question of let's say the social. I don't think the solution is that cultural institutions start to try to be social workers, for example, because we already don't have enough resources for what we do, to be honest, and there's still so much to do in regards to, for example, power structures in cultural institutions, in regards to how do we want to work together, how do we include families, for example, Kinderbetreuung, etc., stuff like this, which would make the work in cultural institutions much more social, for example. But this is something I think we have to start with first. And most institutions work under a total precarity situation. in this field we are talking about. Of course, there are the big ships, state theaters, etc. And then I think we come to the question how to, let's say, push those ships a bit in another direction with more force, because I think, even though this is very unpopular, but I think we will have to question the Verteilung, the distribution of cultural funding, and what do we actually want to support with a lot of money in Germany, which is great. And I'm not saying let's close houses or whatever, but the thing I love to tell is when I came here, there was 4 Zauberflöte shows in Berlin in one weekend. So we put in a lot of money in some kind of a cultural fetish somehow, and we're missing a lot out. And if we want to talk about relevance of culture, we have to change this perspective, I think.
Okay, and so where should the money go instead, and to what end?
I think we would have to think about who governs those institutions also, and how to change structures in those institutions. I'm not saying let's, of course there's, this is beautiful music, this is a beautiful heritage, but at the end it's something which can coexist with a lot of other very important stuff that we have to deal with nowadays. And we lack resources for this, and we put a lot of resources in the other. And I think to balance this out in the existing institutions, for example, would be a very important first step.
And how would you two redistribute the funding? I mean, you already said it should be a lot easier, but where does it go then? And should it go to, for example, very fixed places, or would you rather say that we should also just think of those more nomadic sort of programs?
I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned during the pandemic is we are doing already too much. And I think we also, the cultural institutions, we created this thing FOMO, you know. Everything is happening at the same time. People are trying to catch this and that. After this talk, I'm going to this other event happening. And people just need time. Also, like more than the money. And of course, like they're super close related. Maybe we should go through like simplification processes. You know, less things, we're doing less things, like less things are supported, or in a longer duration. So, of course, the capital should be divided to many cultural operators as well.
Yeah, but you're talking about individual artists rather than venues per se, right?
No, also the venues. I mean, we are like, as cultural operators, I mean, what is the reason for doing like many things at the same time? Just do less. People get more attention than the audience, and then they feel more cared. The community grows automatically, so why not?
I think when we were talking before about involving projects from the neighborhood or something, it's the question, like, can we maybe integrate people from the neighborhood in the work we do? Not only like see those people as an audience, but how could they maybe come into juries? How could they propose projects or something like this to have like, or propose a project and then get like a mentor to work with or something to kind of for artistic quality or something. I think this could be maybe interesting avenues. And also kind of thinking if the kind of a pandemic situation would continue, to think what do we want to achieve with the cultural or artistic practice, and what are different ways to do this, and how can we do this like in smaller groups and so on. Like, but I think also there is also still money, so there are wealthy people. So I'm more like the taxes, like could there be a cultural tax for wealthy people or something? They could kind of become patrons of the arts or whatever. You know, those kind of things I think is also important to think about.
I've been talking a lot about, because of course we have the institutional perspective, but about institutions, but of course what you already also said, like especially in Berlin, there's so many artists who work from project to project, and to break this circle of overproduction. Also, it's on the one hand overproduction, on the other hand, it's an incredible tension, and because it could always be the last project that you do, it could always be the last funding. So we could very easily turn this around, and this somehow even happened now in the pandemic, ironically, that people for the first time got a steady, let's say, salary for all the work that they do, the composition, the training of your body, the everything that you do beside the actual presentation of an artwork is normally not paid at all. And now in the pandemic, for the first time, people got like stipends and stuff, which we are fighting for since a long time, actually. And this is something which is very important, because it's also not like the institutions against the artists or whatever. It's actually a balance between the two. It's building up resilience for the artists and for the institutions, so they can support and each other and survive also.
I totally agree with that. I think like the institution is so much on just presentation, but then everything else happens in private. But what if the institution is much more like a process? If the process and also the longer term perspectives is much more in the focus, I think, of arts funding and production. And you also have spaces to collectively experiment among artists with participants who come in from outside, like those things, but not just production, and everything else is somewhere, happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it would be necessary to also reconsider the organizational structures within cultural institutions for that? Because you've just mentioned collective decision processes essentially, and if we're talking about the future of the cultural institution as such, like, do we actually need a, no offense, but like director for anything, or should that maybe a team of people rather than just one person?
I can start because I'm.
Sorry.
No. It's a very reasonable question and very important question, because we see in Berlin every 3 weeks some failing of a director or a directress or whatever, and always think, okay, why actually do we prolong this kind of aristocratic way of governance? Which is also, when we talk about the relevance of culture, but in the structure we do something which is even not keeping up with democratic standards somehow. It's very questionable, actually. On the other hand, I'm also not thinking, okay, everything has to be a collective now, because this has other downsides. So it's a very good time to experiment and to question power relations and governance. And for example, we're doing now which is kind of a co-curatorial concept. We have invited 3 curators who work with us over this year and hopefully over the next year also to have, let's say, an outside but also an inside eye, which questions our practice, which works as a corrective also, but also we have a steady exchange with them. So we try to let's say open this mono perspective up, but there's different ways, I think.
I would also like to go back to your idea about, like artists getting paid during the pandemic, and then it was kind of happening automatically anyways, which I totally support the idea. But also in Germany, if you're not a big institution, you're getting really restricted amount of support. And then of course people have to like produce one after another. And even like if you're getting this governmental support, there is this funny rule that only 20% of the total budget can be used for the organizational team. So like if you have a project which is like 50,000 euros budget, whole organizational team gets like 5,000 or like 10,000. It's even 10%. It's like, how would you live with this? So how would one person live with this, and then how would like the whole team can live with this? And also the other funny thing happened with the Corona supporting was like artists got supported. It's amazing. They like Kunstfonds opened a call, and then the Berliner Senate opened a call, and it's really like many opportunities popped up. And then there was so little for the curators. Again, it's just like there is this fake and false imagery of the curators, like they're doing fine, but they're not allowed in the KSK. They're not just getting the more support. I mean, as the same amount of support as the artists too. So there are also these strange dynamics.
I think we have to bring this to an end, unfortunately, because the next event is about to start in 10 minutes or so. But I think what I'm getting from this discussion is that maybe instead of asking for the social effects, we should maybe ask for political efforts we can make in order to change something about this system that is maybe sometimes, a little bit unjust. And maybe that's one way to start rethinking the cultural institution, the cultural venue from the ground up, I think. Can we agree on this, or am I just extrapolating something?
I think I think all of us want to have a social effect. It's not like la pour la, you know. We're doing our work in order to have a social effect, but through culture, like through building relationships and through culture. It would be a misunderstanding if I think it is about being situated in a city, in a society, and having the social effect. But we start with culture. We don't start with, let's say, direct social actions, perhaps.
Okay. Famous last words. Thank you very much, Matthias, Ece, Andrea, and thank all of you for coming round and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.